Welcome to the art class.
Imagine digging up a wooden Roman chariot, brushing off the centuries of dirt, and finding a fully functioning, perfectly machined V8 engine hidden inside the chassis.
Right, which would just completely break your brain.
Exactly. But that is really the only way to describe the historical anomaly we are exploring today. We're looking at an artist who was painting with absolute, undeniable photographic perfection in the 1660s, which is, two full centuries before the invention of the camera.
It is a profound disruption to our understanding of the timeline of technology. When you look at the source material we are pulling from today, you realize this isn't just some quirky footnote in art history.
No, definitely not.
It's an anachronism so glaring that once you learn to spot it, you will literally never look at a museum wall the same way again.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are going through a massive stack of sources for you today. We've got decades of art history research, cutting-edge optical science data, and this really obsessive years-long experiment by a modern tech entrepreneur.
Yeah, it's quite the mix of sources.
It really is.
Yeah.
And our mission today is to answer a question that has fiercely divided art historians for the last 20 years. Did one of history's greatest painters essentially cheat?
And we should emphasize right up front that this debate goes far beyond whether a guy in the 17th century just took a shortcut. This is a fundamental exploration of human perception, the intersection of art and machinery, and really how we actually define the concept of genius.
Okay, let's unpack this. We need to start by looking at the man at the center of this storm, Johannes Vermeer. Today, you can buy socks and coffee mugs with his paintings on them. He is universally recognized.
Oh, absolutely. He's an icon.
But reading through these historical accounts, the actual life he lived is overwhelmingly mundane, and honestly, it sounds relentlessly stressful.
It's a stark contrast to his pristine, silent canvases, for sure. Johannes Vermeer was born in 1632 in Delft.
Right.
And at the time, Delft was a relatively small, meticulously orderly Dutch city. You might know it for its famous blue and white pottery or its booming beer industry. It was really a place defined by commerce and clean canals.
But Vermeer himself wasn't some wealthy, celebrated artist throwing lavish parties. He was completely obscure during his lifetime.
Yeah, very much a working class guy.
To make ends meet, he ran an inn. He worked as an art dealer, but he was mostly selling other people's art, not his own. And then there's the crazy detail of his household. He had 15 children.
15 children living in a 17th century Dutch house.
It's wild.
The sheer volume of noise, the constant chaos, the relentless financial pressure of feeding that many mouths, it is almost unimaginable.
And that financial pressure ultimately crushed him. He died when he was just 43 years old, buried in massive debt.
It's a really tragic end.
Yeah, his wife literally had to declare bankruptcy after he passed. And the world didn't mourn the loss of a great master. The world just completely shrugged. He was forgotten for centuries.
Entirely erased from the cultural memory. And a major reason he was so easily forgotten is his astonishingly low output. He only painted 37 pictures in his entire life.
37. If you do the math on a working adult life, that is roughly one painting every year and a half.
Which is glacial, even for the meticulous standards of the Dutch Golden Age. That is incredibly slow.
Yeah.
And because there were so few of his works in the world, the ones that did survive were often misattributed to other painters, basically just so they could be sold. He remained in complete obscurity until 1866, when a French art critic named Théophile Thoré entered the picture.
Right. Thoré basically stumbles onto a Vermeer, recognizes this singular, inexplicable quality to the light, and just becomes utterly obsessed.
He acts as an art detective. He spent years tracking down this forgotten Dutch master's work all over Europe.
He initially thought there were about 70 paintings.
I did, yeah. Modern historians have since rigorously whittled that down to the 37 confirmed works we know today. But Thoré's initial instinct was spot on. He saw something in those canvases that defied the standard progression of artistic technique.
It's like finding a dusty floppy disk in a basement, loading it up, and discovering it's full of perfect, hyper-realistic, modern 3D graphics. But the files are dated 1985. That's the vibe here.
That is a perfect analogy.
How could a broke innkeeper, living in a freezing, chaotic house with 15 kids running around, paint with an inexplicable, almost impossible optical quality.
Well, when modern researchers started applying scientific analysis to those 37 canvases, they began noticing specific visual evidence that points to physical impossibilities. Things that suggest Vermeer was seeing the world through a lens rather than just with the naked human eye.
The detective work on this is fascinating because it starts with architecture. In 1975, a researcher and architect named Philip Stedman decided to look at Vermeer's paintings not just as aesthetic objects, but as architectural blueprints.
Yes, Stedman understood that human beings, when painting from observation, do not naturally paint with mathematically flawless perspective.
Because we're always moving.
Exactly. We have binocular vision, two eyes that constantly composite an image. We breathe, we shift our weight, we move our heads. Because our physical perspective is always slightly in flux, a purely observed painting will always have tiny, microscopic errors in its vanishing points.
But Stedman reverse-engineered the math of Vermeer's paintings. He measured the angles of the floor tiles, the proportions of the furniture, the exact tapering of the window frames.
It's incredibly precise work.
It is. And he proved that almost all of Vermeer's interior scenes originate from a single, fixed, mathematically perfect point in the exact same room, facing the exact same corner.
Which was his studio. And to prove it, Stedman built a physical 1:6 scale model of Vermeer's room based entirely on the calculations extracted from the paintings.
And what happened?
Well, when Stedman projected light through his physical model, the geometry perfectly matched the painted projections on Vermeer's canvases. The precision is so absolute that it heavily implies Vermeer was not observing a room with two shifting human eyes. He was locked into a specific frozen optical projection of it.
That fixed perspective is strange enough, but then you look at the lighting and you run into this concept of bokeh. Vermeer heavily used a technique called pointillé, right? Tiny, distinct dots of light-colored pigment.
He did. Up close, pointillé looks almost random, little dabs of thick, light paint. But from a few feet back, those dots create the illusion of shimmering light on a textured surface, like the crust of a loaf of bread or the intricate threads of a tapestry.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Our sources point out that these shimmer dots perfectly mimic what modern photographers know as bokeh.
Yes.
If you've ever used a camera with a high-quality lens or even portrait mode on your phone,
Yeah.
you know that things in the background that are out of focus don't just become a generic blur. The light breaks apart into distinct, soft, glowing circles.
And that is a crucial distinction. Bokeh is a mechanical artifact of light passing through a curved piece of glass. It is a physical distortion created by a lens.
But the human eye does not see bokeh. If I take off my glasses and look at a distant streetlight, it's just a fuzzy blob.
Right, it doesn't separate like that.
My biological eye does not produce distinct, glowing halos of light.
So wait, are we saying he just essentially traced these? He painted lens blur before lenses were taking photos.
Precisely. The naked eye cannot produce bokeh. And the biological limitations of the human eye bring us to perhaps the most compelling piece of visual evidence, which is anatomically precise shadows.
Okay.
Think about arguably his most famous work, The Girl with a Pearl Earring, painted around 1665, which is at the Mauritshuis in The Hague.
It's an iconic image. The vivid blue turban, the glowing pearl, the way she's looking over her shoulder.
Focus on the shadow under her nose or the gradient on her cheek. It is incredibly subtle. It blends so smoothly into the lighter skin tones that it is practically imperceptible unless you are staring right at it. But it is anatomically and optically perfect.
And why is that a problem?
The problem lies in evolutionary biology. The human eye has a built-in autocorrect feature governed by our visual cortex.
Meaning our brains actively alter what we see. Constantly. We evolved to recognize faces and identify threats in varying lighting conditions, like under a forest canopy. Because of that, our brains naturally flatten shadows and artificially boost contrast to make shapes more recognizable.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we do not see raw objective light, we see an interpreted version of it. If you tried to paint a human face just by looking at a model, your brain's survival hardwiring would force you to paint the shadow either too dark or too sharp, because your brain insists that the edge of the nose is a distinct boundary.
So our brains are trying to be helpful for survival, but they actually make us terrible at copying raw objective reality.
Exactly. To capture a shadow with a gradient that's subtle and objective, you cannot be looking at a three-dimensional person. You have to be looking at a flattened two-dimensional projected image, and you have to be tracing it. You're matching it color for color, bypassing your brain's shape recognition software entirely.
If the naked eye physically can't hold a perfect mathematical perspective, can't see lens blur, and actively sabotages the painting of subtle shadows, we have to ask what exact machine this 17th century innkeeper was actually using. The sources point heavily to a device called the camera obscura.
Camera obscura simply translates from Latin as dark room. And fundamentally, that's all it is. It's a darkened room or a large dark box with a tiny pinhole punctured in one wall.
And because light travels in straight lines, the light rays from the brightly lit outside world pass through that tiny hole, cross over each other, and project a full-color, moving but upside-down image of the outside world onto the opposite wall of the dark room.
It's a natural optical phenomenon, and it wasn't a closely guarded secret in the 1600s either.
Right.
Leonardo da Vinci had written extensively about the camera obscura over a century earlier. The scientific community of the Dutch Golden Age, which included pioneers in lens grinding, who coincidentally lived in Delft at the same time as Vermeer, they were very familiar with optics.
But the sources highlight a massive practical problem here. You can't just say, oh, he used a camera obscura and call the mystery solved.
No, absolutely not.
If you've ever stood inside one, the projected image is incredibly dim. It flickers wildly with the outside light. If a cloud passes over the sun, all the color values change instantly.
It's extremely volatile.
Furthermore, if you stick a canvas on the wall and try to trace the projection, your own hand blocks the light.
Exactly. Tracing a dim, shifting projection in a pitch-black room while simultaneously trying to mix complex oil paints is practically impossible, which is why, for decades, this debate remained purely academic. Art historians would theorize that he used a lens, and practicing painters would counter by saying, try painting in the dark. The mechanics just don't work.
That stalemate lasted until a modern tech entrepreneur named Tim Jenison entered the chat. Jenison is not an art historian. He's a highly successful hardware and software engineer. If you remember the early days of desktop video editing, he actually invented the video toaster. He's a guy who profoundly understands pixels, light, and how machines process images.
And Jenison became utterly consumed by the Vermeer mystery. He recognized that the camera obscura alone wasn't enough. There had to be an intermediary piece of hardware.
Yeah.
This obsession led to a years-long experiment, which was meticulously documented in the 2013 film Tim's Vermeer, which was actually produced by the magicians Penn and Teller.
Jenison didn't just write a theoretical paper. He physically built the exact room Stedman had mapped out in his architectural research. He sourced period-accurate 17th century pigments and painstakingly ground them by hand.
He really went all in.
He did. And then he engineered an optical setup using a camera obscura, a lens, and a crucial missing piece, a small mirror on a stick, known as a comparator mirror.
The comparator mirror is the key that unlocks the entire process. Here is how it hacks the visual cortex. You place the small mirror at a 45-degree angle between your eyes and the canvas. When you look down at the edge of the mirror, you see the reflection of the brightly lit, projected image from the camera obscura lens. Just past the edge of the mirror, you see your own physical canvas.
So you aren't drawing shapes. You're just holding your paintbrush right at the boundary line of the mirror's edge.
Precisely. You mix your paint and you dab it onto the canvas. If the color of your paint perfectly matches the color of the optical reflection in the mirror, the hard edge of the mirror seems to magically disappear.
That is wild.
Your visual cortex can no longer distinguish the boundary between the reflection and reality.
So he's essentially bypassing the brain's shape recognition software entirely and just functioning as a human color printer.
Yeah.
He doesn't need to know how to draw a nose. He just needs to match the exact microscopic shade of pixel color until the mirror line vanishes.
What's fascinating here is that Jenison's experiment shifted the entire Vermeer debate from academic theory to undeniable physical proof. Jenison is a man who openly admits he has absolutely zero artistic training.
Right, he's a tech guy.
He cannot draw, yet he sat down with his mirror contraption.
And 213 days later, he produced a masterpiece. He recreated Vermeer's incredibly complex painting, The Music Lesson. The result isn't just a nice copy. The sources state it is a near-perfect, visually indistinguishable reproduction.
It's uncanny.
It features the mathematically flawless perspective. It features the bokeh on the textured fabrics. It captures those impossible, biologically elusive shadow gradients. An untrained tech guy painted a Vermeer using 17th century hardware.
It is a staggering achievement, but it forces a massive, uncomfortable reckoning for the traditional art world.
So what does this all mean for Vermeer's legacy? If an untrained engineer can paint a masterpiece just by following a mechanical optical trick, does that completely destroy Johannes Vermeer's status as a genius? Was he just a 17th century human photocopier?
That exact question has fueled the fierce 20-year debate we mentioned at the start. The art world remains deeply fractured on what these findings mean. On one side, you have advocates championed by the famous British painter David Hockney. In his 2001 book, Secret Knowledge, Hockney meticulously argues that old masters like Vermeer, Caravaggio, and Velázquez absolutely used optical aids.
But Hockney's stance is that using a lens doesn't diminish their greatness at all, right? It just demystifies our understanding of their craft. To Hockney, a lens is just another tool, no different than a specialized brush or a carefully stretched canvas.
However, the skeptical side of the art establishment vehemently disagrees. They point out that no matter how compelling Jenison's physical proof is, the historical evidence remains entirely circumstantial.
Because they never found a camera.
Exactly. When Vermeer died in massive debt, his estate was rigorously inventoried for bankruptcy court. They listed everything, down to the broken chairs and specific pots, but no camera, obscura, or complex mirror system was ever found. There is zero mention of lenses in any of his surviving documents.
The skeptics also argue that a lens does not make compositional choices, and I kept thinking about a specific analogy while reading through these sources. Nobody calls modern professional photographers cheaters just because the camera captures the light for them.
That's a great point.
We don't look at a breathtaking Ansel Adams landscape and say, well, the lens did all the heavy lifting. The art of photography isn't in the chemical capture of light. It's in what the photographer chooses to point the camera at, how they frame the subject, and the specific moment they decide to capture it.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, your photography analogy is exactly the framework we need to use to reevaluate Vermeer. It pivots the conversation away from mechanics and toward the deeper philosophy of seeing.
Because the history of art actually went through this exact crisis, didn't it? When photography was officially invented in the 1840s, painters absolutely panicked.
Oh, they were terrified. For centuries, the primary utility of painting was to capture reality and document history as accurately as possible. Suddenly, a machine could accomplish in seconds what took a master painter months. Many declared that painting was entirely dead.
But painting didn't die. It evolved.
It survived because artists realized that true art isn't merely about executing a carbon copy of objective reality. It's about curation. It's about emotion, emphasis, and deciding what is actually worthy of being looked at.
And even if we assumed Vermeer used a lens and a comparator mirror, the sheer physical labor involved in this process is staggering.
Unbelievable.
It took Tim Jenison 213 days of grueling, microscopic focus just to paint one reproduction. Vermeer was spending weeks on every single square inch of canvas. He was grinding minerals and mixing toxic lead-based paints by hand. He was sitting rigidly in a freezing Dutch room in the dead of winter, trying to catch the fleeting morning light, all while 15 children are likely screaming down the hall.
The psychological endurance required to work like that is its own distinct form of genius. But beyond the endurance, look at what Vermeer actually chose to point his theoretical camera at. His subject matter is where his true brilliance lies.
In the 1600s, great art was supposed to be grand. It was supposed to depict heroic military battles, sweeping Greek myths, or flattering, opulent portraits of European kings and queens.
Right, the big important subjects.
But Vermeer ignored all of that entirely. He focused on the quietest, most inconsequential moments of domestic life. A woman reading a letter by an open window. A girl quietly focused on weaving lace.
Or consider the milkmaid. The painting features a household servant simply pouring milk from a jug into a heavy bowl. It's currently in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, and the sources note that it is shockingly small when you view it in person, yet it commands the room.
It's beautiful.
Vermeer elevates an incredibly mundane, working-class Tuesday morning into something sacred. He does this purely through the reverence of his attention. The way the cool morning light catches the crust of the bread basket and illuminates the virus yellow of her blouse.
There is a quote attributed to Vermeer that seems to perfectly encapsulate his philosophy. He supposedly said, "I am painting what I observe, nothing more."
Nothing more. Yet what he observed and how he chose to observe it was pure magic. The camera obscura, if he did indeed use it, was simply a mechanism to bypass the biological flaws of the human eye so he could see the light more accurately. But the machine did not provide the soul. True genius is the specific, empathetic choice of focusing on a quiet girl, a dusty window pane, and the transient beauty of morning light. The lens didn't choose to immortalize that. Vermeer did.
So, to bring our journey full circle today, whether Johannes Vermeer utilized a complex, hidden array of 17th century lenses and mirrors, or whether he somehow possessed strange, biologically impossible eyes, the legacy remains intact. He looked at the everyday, overlooked world, he captured the light so perfectly, and he gave it back to us with such staggering clarity that we are still fiercely debating his methods 350 years later.
This raises an important question, though, and it's a thought I want to leave you to mull over as we wrap up. If we synthesize two very distinct facts from our sources today, a new, slightly darker picture of Vermeer emerges.
Okay, I'm listening.
Think about Tim Jenison's grueling 213-day timeline just to paint one reproduction using the mirror technique. Now contrast that with the great historical mystery of why Vermeer only produced 37 paintings in his entire lifetime.
One painting every year and a half.
Historians have always been puzzled by that uniquely low output. Was he constantly distracted by his work as an art dealer? Was the inn taking up all his time?
Right.
But consider this. If Vermeer was painstakingly matching microscopic dots of toxic paint to a dim, flickering optical reflection in a dark room, day after day, month after month, trapped by the rigid demands of his own perfectionism, maybe his small portfolio isn't proof of a lack of inspiration or time. Maybe it's the ultimate proof of a man utterly imprisoned by his devotion to a grueling secret technology.
A prisoner to his own perfect machine. If you want to see exactly how demanding this machine truly is, I highly encourage you to go watch the 2-hour documentary Tim's Vermeer on YouTube to see the process for yourself. Seeing Jenison slowly lose his mind trying to paint the intricate pattern of a single 17th century rug is worth the time alone. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Next time you look at a perfectly clear photograph, just remember, someone might have engineered that exact same perfection in a dark, freezing room in 1660. Catch you next time.